Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was also a little bit of a surprise for me to give a talk here, so it's really great to be here. Data, and that's really what I do with statistics. Data is a very powerful thing because it can be used to teach people and to convince people about things that they wouldn't normally believe. You've all heard about the terrible typhoon Haiyan that has hit the Philippines and caused widespread destruction. A lot of people have said, oh, that's because of global warming. But actually, if you look at how the number of serious hurricanes that landfalled in the West-North Pacific, of which the Philippines is part, since 1950, it's actually been going down, not up. I've shared that over the last day on Facebook and Twitter, and people immediately say, sure, but what about the impact? What about the actual cost to all of these societies? Well, we actually also have other research that indicates, no, it's not been going up, it's probably been going down, certainly since the 1990s. So again, people say, oh yes, but you're just showing the impact on landfall hurricanes. What about all of the hurricanes? Well, we also have data for that. It's called the Accumulated Cyclone Energy Index. We have it back from 1972. And we've actually not seen, neither globally nor for the Northern Hemisphere, a lower index since the 1970s. And of course, after that, Twitter sort of fell silent. I'm not sure whether it actually convinced people, but certainly it makes it harder to make bad statements. And that's really what I think this is about, realizing that yes, there is global warming, but it's not the end of the world, and we need to find smart ways to tackle it. Yes, there are lots of problems, but we need to get a sense of priority. That was why I was very happy to be able to share with you this book that, together with 21 of the world's top economists, we worked about 2 years on looking across all the different areas of human existence from 1900 to 2050, and we thought it'd probably be reasonable to go through that in about 8 minutes. So if I could just share briefly with you a sense of how do we approach that and what are the results? Well, fundamentally what we try to do is to look at this from an economist point of view, because that enables us not just to look across time, how's things gone from 1900 to 2050, but also across areas. Essentially what we've looked at, take for instance education, crucially important thing. How has education gone? Well, actually in 1900, just take a very simple way of measuring education. In 1900, 70% of all people on the planet were illiterate. 70%. The average amount of education was 1 year. What we try to do then is to say, well, how much better would the world have been off if we'd actually dealt with that? If everybody was literate? If we didn't have the 70% illiterate, how much better would we be off? Well, it turns out in present day dollars, we'd probably be about $240 billion better off. That's what our econometric estimates indicate. Well, that's a little hard to understand. What exactly is that? The world made about $2 trillion in 1900. So actually, it's about 12% richer the world would have been in 1900 had we all been literate. That means we can suddenly get a sense of how big of a problem was it? Well, we forewent 12%. How is it today? Well, today we have about 20% illiterates, mostly legacy people. Most kids actually learn to read globally today. And by 2050, we estimate we'll still have about 12% illiterates. So it's gone down dramatically. Now, of course, if you're illiterate, you still, if you had been literate, would have contributed much, much more. So how much of global GDP is it? Well, it actually turns out that today it's down from 12%, it's down to 7%, and in 2050, it'll probably be about 4%. So the world has gotten better, much better on education. We now get about 8 years worth of education on average on the planet, and by 2050, we probably estimate we'll get about 10 years worth of education. But of course, that's just one of the many topics of human existence. We go through a lot of things. Perhaps the most important one is human health, because let's face it, yes, it's great to have good education, it's great to have a good environment, but it's not much fun if you're dead. So in some sense, Maybe the most important fact is that we live much, much longer. In 1900, the average person on Earth lived to be 32 years on average. 32 years. Today, that number is 69 years. In 2050, we estimate it'll be 76 years on average globally. The phenomenal fact, and I'm sure Matt will talk a lot more about this, the phenomenal fact is that for every month you live on this planet, your life expectancy increases by 1 week. Isn't that amazing? I think it's one of those things we just don't appreciate. So the cost of us not living as long in 1900, we estimate was 32% of global GDP. We could have been 32% richer. Today, it's about 10% in 2050. It'll just be 5%. Let me just share two other, I think, interesting areas of environment. A lot of people worry about global warming, as I also started talking about. But in reality, how big of a problem was it that we didn't have, if we wouldn't have had global warming in 1900? Well, it turns out it's one of those places where it's really, really simple to do because we've spent a lot of billions of dollars on building global warming models. So it's actually really, really easy to backdate it and see what would the world have been like in 1900, 1910, and 1920 if we had not had global warming. And perhaps a little surprisingly, it actually turns out it would have been a worse world. We're actually better off because of global warming. It was about 0%, a little above 0%, but today the benefit of global warming is actually around 1.2, 1.3%, and it'll probably max out around 2025 at about 1.5% of global GDP. We're actually better off. This surprises a lot of people, but the simple point, of course, is that higher CO2 means that we have better yields, because CO2 is a fertilizer. Everyone who has an industrial gardening center, a greenhouse, knows that. You pump in CO2 to get better tomatoes or other things. Yes, there are also problems with CO2, but mostly there are benefits. Yes, we have more heat deaths, but we have vastly fewer cold deaths. There will be some other problems. We have more water scarcity. We have more extreme weather, certainly in the long run. But overall, the net impact is significantly positive. Now, in the long run, towards the end of the century, global warming will actually turn into net disbenefit, which is one of the reasons why we need to tackle it. But it's certainly important not to get out of whack and think, oh my God, it's the end of the world. But of course, crucially also, and this is one of the things I just do not understand, global warming is by no means the most important environmental problem. Not only is it not a problem globally, it's actually a benefit right now, but it will be a problem later. But it's in the order of 1%. Let's just compare that to some of the other problems. The vastly biggest environmental problem in the world, and actually one of the biggest problems in the world, is air pollution. But not what you think. It's not outdoor air pollution. It's indoor air pollution. If you think back to pictures from early 1900s, we cooked and did lots of crappy stuff inside. We used a lot of coal to keep ourselves warm. And still about 3.2 billion people use cardboard, twigs, dung to keep warm and cook inside. And it doesn't make for pretty living. We actually estimate that most of the third world outdoor cities are about 10 times more polluted than probably Melbourne is. Terrible places, Bangkok or Beijing, terrible places to go. But most indoor places in third world countries are 10 times more polluted than that. And most really poor households around the world, if you want clean air, you go outside. So really what this means is we estimate about 3 million people die from indoor air pollution every year, 3.5 million people. It was probably a lot more back in 1900. So in 1900, the cost of not having clean air, mostly indoor clean air, was about 23% of global GDP. The next highest problem in the world, and that has gone down dramatically. Actually, over the 20th century, we estimate indoor air pollution killed about twice as many people as all the people killed in all the wars of the 20th century. So very clearly a huge issue, but it's not a very sexy one. It's not the one we talk about, but maybe it should be. It was 23%, now it's down to 10% in 2050 because people get richer, because they can afford cleaner fuels, which are very often fossil fuels, by the way. We actually end up in a better world. And so the beauty of this, and that's really all I want to leave you with, the beauty of this is that if you look across all these different areas, you both get a sense, fundamentally, we have done tremendously much better. Looking at virtually all these different areas, we also look at war, we look at malnutrition, we look at gender inequality, a lot of other areas. We have done a lot better. It doesn't mean that there are no problems. There's still lots of stuff to fight for. But now we can also start looking at what's the size of these different issues and why is it we so disproportionately worry about things that are very small or maybe even positive, whereas we fail to worry about the big things where we can make a huge difference for a lot of people around the world. So that's really what this book is about. If you want to talk to me or know more about this, give me your card, and I'd love to share some more things. I just have a new TED Talk out, one of those 16-minute talks I did last month in New York with all the numbers and all the graphs. They told me not to use PowerPoint here. I also have another book I'd love to, if you give me your card, I'll send you this. It's How to Spend $75 Billion to Make the World a Better Place. We wrote it for Bill Gates. Who's read it? But it can also show you how to spend less than this. A lot of people tell me I should have written how to make $75 billion, but that's for another time. But I'll send you that book as well. Listen, thank you very much. It was great talking to you. I'll look forward to your questions. Thanks.